What is up, YouTube? Dottz Gaming here, and today I am bringing you guys my first installment of a big series I will be doing over the next 5 weeks, and that is my leveling build series. This video is going to have a bit of a longer intro than the other ones, so please bear with me for a second, but this is the first one, and I just want to explain the whole series before I get into the Templar guide. This is not going to be a leveling build or builds in the traditional sense like you might expect. In my opinion, and in the opinions of many other intermediate and veteran players that I have spoken to, traditional leveling builds are absolutely a waste of time. You're constantly replacing your gear, so why keep crafting it for yourself? As a new player, you probably don't even have access to a crafter to constantly make you gear. You also should not be relegating yourself to one set of skills or even like a couple different sets of skills. What you should be doing is experimenting and learning while you play, and most importantly, spending your leveling process enjoying the game, and like I said, learning your class and learning your character. And in my opinion, a static leveling build can take that learning process away from you. So what I plan to do with my leveling builds is give you instead a framework to follow, showing you some of the most commonly used abilities for each class and each role, with some of my own flair thrown in, allowing you to pick and choose from a list of abilities and mix and match how you like. This will allow you guys to experiment with different stuff as you level up, and come end game, you'll not only have a lot, if not all, of the most commonly used abilities leveled up and morphed, but you'll know which of these you personally like the most and what works best for you. I'm going to be covering all the roles for every class video that I make: stamina DPS, Magicka DPS, tanks, and healers. A disclaimer before I start though, this is my opinion. I am not saying that I am the end-all be-all and you have to follow this to a T, or else you may as well not play. If you don't like something, change it. If you want to experiment with something else, go for it. If you want to try a different ability, be my guest. This is just what I came up with from the research that I've done, along with, like I said, some of my own personal opinions thrown in. Remember, the goal of these frameworks is to make the leveling process easier and set you up for endgame. You may need to respec come endgame if you decide to maybe go a different route with your build, more PvE, more PvE, but that's not what you should even be worrying about right now. Nor do you need to worry about that until you are gear cap, aka CP 160. The goal of this guide is to assist you in your leveling process and help prepare your skill trees and abilities to be used in a proper setup of your own or someone else's design come end game. But with the intro, out of the way, we are going to move into our first class, and that is the Templar. I'm choosing to start with Templar first for this guide because Templars make a great first character for new players due to the fact that they have a dedicated healing tree, and new players can utilize that out in their adventures to really help them stay alive throughout tough quests. For those of you who are very new, Templars are your priests, your paladins, your holy warriors of the game. They are definitely, though, the best healers in ESO, boasting an amazing arsenal of tools at their disposal while playing healer. You can, though, still be a DPS, stamina, and Magicka, as well as a tank, so don't feel like you're forced into playing a healer if you choose a Templar. Now shown is the timestamps for the different build sections I'm going to cover. Feel free to skip to those sections that concern with what resource or what role you want to be playing, and watch what part of the video that you need. Starting with Magicka DPS, though, is the first one we are going to be covering. These are the different sections I'm going to be going over for every race, for every role, We're going to be going over race, gear, attributes, vampire, werewolf, mortal, mundus, potions and food, abilities, passives, rotation. Those are the sections that we will have. So getting right into it, we have 4 race choices for your Magicka Templar. We are looking at High Elf, Brett, and Dark Elf or Argonian. High Elf is going to be your number 1 for PvE, and Argonian is going to be your number 1 for PvP at the time of making this video. You can, though, really choose any one of these 4 and be fine. The difference between the best and the worst race is a couple of percentage points from this list. So I would personally say choose what you feel like you just would enjoy the most. Like I said, though, High Elf is definitely your number 1 for PvE, will pump out the most damage. Argonian is your number 1 for PvP due to the amount of sustain that it brings. Moving into gear, though, the gear setup you're going to want to try to maintain throughout your leveling process is 5 pieces of light, 1 medium, and 1 heavy, as well as using destruction staves on both your front and back bar, or using dual wield and a destruction staff. You could also get away with doing that as well. Also, if you maybe plan on doing some sort of PvP, you may want to also add a resto staff somewhere throughout your leveling process, or put a resto ability somewhere in your bar so that it levels up with you. But if you want to stay more of a PvE-oriented type of person, double destro or dual wield destro is going to be what you want to use for weapons. The reason I say 5 light, 1 medium, 1 heavy is due to the fact that light is going to level much quicker than the other two. The other two will still level up though, but being that light is going to be your primary armor type, you want it to level up the fastest. Also, when I'm going to go into passives later, but when you're putting points in your passives, there are passives that you will only gain benefit from if you are wearing 5 pieces of light gear, as well as when Clockwork City comes out, you're only going to be able to use annulment if you're wearing 5 pieces of light armor. So I would try to maintain that 5-1-1 setup as much as you physically can. In terms of attributes, we are looking all into Magicka. The reason we're going all into Magicka is due to the fact that your abilities scale and get stronger with Magicka. So, you want to put all your points in Magicka to make them deal as much damage as possible. It also makes your resource pool bigger. It's just, in my opinion, the way to go. In terms of vampire versus werewolf versus mortal, I think you should be a vampire. Vampires in Morrowind and the patches since then have been very strong. The recovery that you gain for being a vampire is absolutely fantastic, and I think that recovery is worth the negatives that come along with it. In terms of your Mundus Stone, I believe the highest DPS increase Mundus Stone is Apprentice. Apprentice is the one that gives you spell damage, so that is going to be the one that you want to go with. A couple other options if you don't want to go with Apprentice are Lover, which gives you penetration, Mage, which gives you Magicka, and Thief, which gives you crit chance, but I think Apprentice is your number one. In terms of potions and food, you're going to want to try to use mainly any Magicka potions you find. Especially leveling as a new player. Sometimes recovery can be hard to come by, so you want to chug up mana potions as much as possible. If you have, or Magicka potions, wrong game. If you don't have any Magicka potions though, you could really just use any potion you have up. A second potion I'd recommend would just be a health potion, but while leveling, I'd say Magicka potions are probably your best. I'm not going to recommend any fancy crafted potions, because odds are if you're a new player, you're just using whatever potions you pick up throughout your adventures. In terms of food, I would say food's not mandatory, but if you can find some, and you can find it for maybe cheap off of a guild trader, or you pick some up throughout your adventures, or you even want to maybe craft a little bit for yourself, I think that anything that increases your health, Magicka, and or Magicka recovery is going to be what you want to get. So you might have to do a little bit of research into what food is going to give you those benefits. You could either try to go for 2 of those, all 3. It depends. You can even maybe try for a tri-stat, which is the health, Magicka, stamina. But you mainly want to try to focus on health, Magicka, and or Magicka recovery for your food. If you want to use some while you level, I'd recommend if you can find it for cheap, but don't break your bank trying to constantly eat food. Now, in terms of abilities, the biggest section easily of this guide, you want to do your best to have 1 ability from each class tree on both your front and back bar. When you gain experience, whether it be from killing monsters or turning in quests, the abilities on your active bar are the ones that gain experience, as well as their respective skill lines. Another cool trick is if you have abilities on a skill bar that you want to level up, you could switch to that bar when handing in a quest or completing a dungeon to give them and their skill lines a surge of experience. Double check though on your skill line. If you hold your mouse or your cursor over that skill line, the experience bar, it will tell you how it gains experience. For example, restoring light from the Templars, they gain experience from their abilities being used and being on the bar active. But, for example, your vampire skill line simply gains experience from you gaining experience, and you don't have to use any abilities. But I'm mainly talking about your weapon and your I'm mainly talking about your class abilities. You want to make sure that you have 1 ability from each class tree on both your front and back bar. You're going to notice, though, when I do recommend skills, I frequently recommend the first skill of a skill tree as a choice, just to obviously get you started and get, kickstart the leveling of that skill line. If you want to level a weapon or skill tree, like a different one, without using that weapon or skill tree, simply place the skill from that tree on your ability bar, and it'll help you gain experience when you it'll gain experience in that line while you gain experience on that bar. You don't actually have to use it. Weapons don't have to be, the abilities from the weapons don't have to be used for the weapon itself to gain experience. For that ability to gain experience, it needs to be on your bar while gaining experience. But for the weapon line itself, the weapons just simply need to be equipped and used, and you gain experience while you use them. Now, Anyway, enough about my little speech. Into the abilities that I recommend. We have 3 from the Restoring Light tree. We have Cleansing Ritual, which you can morph into, I would recommend, Ritual of Retribution, Rune Focus, which I would recommend morphing into Channel Focus, and Rush Ceremony, which I would recommend into Honor the Dead, excuse me. For Dawn's Wrath, I would recommend Sunfire, which you would morph into Vampire's Bane, Backlash, which you can morph into Purifying Light, and Radiant Destruction, which you can morph into Radiant Oppression. In terms of Adric's Spear, I would recommend Puncturing Strikes, which you would morph into Puncturing Sweep, Spear Shards, which you would morph into Blazing Spear, or Focus Charge, which you would morph into Toppling Charge. Now, that will have you charge the enemy, that CC. You will charge the enemy if you use that one. If you want to stay at a range instead, then I would go Piercing Javelin into Aurora Javelin, and that will be your range CC of choice. You could also look at, I would highly recommend looking into the Mage's Guild and getting Mage Light from the Mage's Guild and morphing that into Inner Light. From your Destruction Staff, you're going to want to be using Wall of Elements, morph that into Elemental Blockade. And then, of course, from your Light Armor, you definitely want to use Annulment as your shield, morphing it into Harness Magicka to help with that Magicka return. In terms of your ultimates, I would recommend using one of these 4, or 2 of these 4, excuse me. You want to, from the Destruction Staff line, you have Elemental Storm, which you can morph into Elemental Rage. From the Adric's Spear line, you have Radial Sweep, which I recommend morphing into Empowering Sweep. You have Dawn's Wrath. For the ultimate from Dawn's Wrath, Nova, which you can morph into Solar Prison, and then Mage's Guild, you have Meteor, which you can morph into Shooting Star. Now, in terms of your passives, guys, you're going to want to look into all the Adric's Spear, Dawn's Wrath, and Restoring Life passives, all of your Racial passives, all of the Light Armor passives, all of the Destruction Staff passives. The optional, though, if you do decide to use Dual Wield, I would recommend, you're not going to need any passives until you get Twin Blade and Blunt. From Vampirism, I'd recommend getting all of the passives except for Savage Feeding and Blood Ritual. You can get Blood Ritual if you want to turn other people into a vampire, but it's not necessary. Alchemy, I would recommend getting Medicinal Use. All your Mage's Guild passives except for Persuasion if you don't want that. If you do, go ahead. Fighter's Guild, I'd recommend just looking into Banish the Wicked. All of your Undaunted passives. And then once all of these are acquired, or most of them, or if you just have some skill points left over you want to put places, you can get the passives from the other armor skill lines, heavy and medium armor, except for the ones that require you to wear 5 pieces of that armor type. I would recommend prioritizing maybe the heavy armor passives first, with the medium armor passives being last, because the medium armor passives aren't all that great for Magicka users, but it's just something to keep in mind. In terms of rotation, you're going to want to use any abilities that give you a buff first, so that they make any subsequent abilities you use stronger, and it'll help you stay alive longer. You optimally want to also use any dots in your build as soon as you engage the fight. So use each dot that you have on an enemy with weaving a light attack in between each of them. So for example, you would use, let's say, Elemental Blockade, Light Attack. Right after the Light Attack animation starts, use Vampire's Bane. That'll cancel the rest of the Light Attack animation, but the Light Attack will still go off, and then your Vampire's Bane will immediately go off. Repeat the Light Attack animation cancel, but then with Blazing Spear or another similar ability, or whatever combination of those 3 you want to do it in, or whatever dots that you decide to run on your bars. Purifying Light is a great ability to use, by the way. When you are going to deal big damage to your enemy, it will duplicate that, so that is definitely something to keep in mind. And you should obviously, for any build, have one spammable ability to use when all of your dots are up, your buffs are rolling, and you don't really need to do much, and you just kind of want to light attack weave with a spammable ability. In this case, that is going to be Puncturing Sweep. Obviously, you're going to want to use any CC shields and heals as needed, and you optimally want to make sure you have a few of these at your disposal while making a build for general play. Moving into stamina DPS, we have 4 race choices. We have Redguard, Khajiit, Wood Elf, or Orc. I would probably say Redguard is going to be your number 1 in most situations, but Khajiit, Wood Elf, and Orc are also going to be really good contenders. Again, we're talking maybe a couple percentage point differences between these ones, so don't get too hung up on it, but I think Redguard is currently pulling ahead at the number 1 spot right now. In terms of gear, we are looking at wearing 1 piece of light, 5 pieces of medium, and 1 piece of heavy, with our weapons being dual wield and bow. If your main focus, though, is going to be PvP, if you plan on PvPing in the future and not really focusing on PvE all that much, I'd recommend using a 2H instead of dual wielding, because 2H is the weapon of choice and not dual wield for PvP. Now, the reason we go 5 medium, 1 light, 1 heavy is it levels medium the fastest while still, leveling light and heavy, but obviously your focus is going to be on medium, which will provide the best passives for you while PvEing. When it comes to PvP at the current moment in time, heavy is pulling ahead of medium for PvP. So you kind of need to make that decision yourself. If you were to really be focusing on PvP endgame, maybe you kind of want to put more emphasis on the heavy armor. But for general playing, I think the 5 medium, 1 light, 1 heavy is going to be the way to go, because medium will give you some really good passives for just general all-around playing. In terms of attributes, you want to put all your points into stamina, being that our skills, the majority of our damaging skills, that's the key here, guys, damaging skills, will scale off of stamina. You want to put your points into stamina, because it increases your resource pool, and your stamina using abilities get stronger. Whether it be, there's no stamina heals, but any ability that uses stamina gets stronger. I'm just prefacing that because as a stamina character, I get this question all the time. You're still going to have Magicka abilities, but what you're going to notice is that those Magicka abilities don't deal damage. A lot of times they're buffs, or they're some sort of utility that costs Magicka. Your damaging abilities, the ones that have a lot of scaling, those are the ones that are going to be based off stamina, because you want those ones to be stronger. A lot of times those Magicka abilities may not get stronger as you get more Magicka. For example, if you look at the Nightblade Cloak, if I have a gabillion Magicka, it doesn't get any stronger as if I have 3. So just keep that in mind when you're playing a stamina DPS character. In terms of vampire, werewolf, mortal, I would recommend being a vampire. The recovery you gain for being a vampire highly outweighs any of the negative benefits. So ever since Morrowind, that's been the case. So I would highly recommend being a vampire. In terms of your Mundus stone, you are looking at warrior is your number 1, the one that increases your weapon damage. Now, I believe the ones that follow warrior are there's lover, thief, and the tower. I believe the tower is the one that gives you stamina. Just flat gives you stamina, so you could really choose any one of those 4, but for raw DPS, warrior is going to be your number 1. In terms of potions and food, I would recommend obviously running stamina potions, the ones that you just pick up from your adventures, because you're going to, as a new player, odds are you're not going to have the greatest recovery in the world, so you should probably run some stam pots as you pick them up. Obviously, if you don't have any stam pots, then, you could use health or Magicka pots as you need them, but as you're picking them up through your adventures, save those stamina potions, because I'd recommend chugging them whenever you need resources. In terms of food, I would say food's probably not mandatory, but if you can find some, try to get something that increases either your health, stamina, and or stamina recovery, whatever food you can find. Or, if you can find a tri-stat food, you can go ahead, the ones that increases health, Magicka, and stamina. But the 3 things you want to focus on are health, stamina, and or stamina recovery. So just keep that in mind if you decide to run food while you're playing. In terms of abilities, guys, you remember you want to do your best to have 1 ability from each class tree on both your front and back bar. When you gain experience, whether it be from killing monsters or quests, the abilities on your active bar are the ones that gain experience as well as their respective skill lines. Another cool trick, like I mentioned in the Magicka section, is if you have abilities on a skill bar that you want to level up, whether it be from weapons you're currently using or other weapons that you're not using, you can switch to that bar when handing in a quest or completing a dungeon to give them and their skill lines a surge of experience. But remember, you want to hover over each skill line that you're using to make sure that that is how they gain experience. For example, the vampire skill line, you could use the skills all you want. Your vampire skill line is not going to level up any faster. It's just through gaining experience itself. So all the class trees level up from being used. All of the weapon trees level up from the weapons themselves being used and or the abilities being used. And then a lot of other skill trees level up in other ways. So like I said, hover over those skill lines and you'll be able to find out how they level up. You're going to notice, though, guys, when I recommend abilities, I do recommend the first skill of a skill tree as a choice for your class trees. This is just to get that skill line first leveled, so just keep that in mind when you're listening to my recommendations. If you want to level another weapon or skill tree without using that weapon or skill, like I said, pick up a skill, put it on your bar, gain experience with it, and that other weapon will still level up. But you don't actually have to use it. In terms of abilities, though, that I would recommend checking out as a stamina DPS Templar, I would recommend from the Restoring Light tree, you have Restoring Aura, which you can morph into Repentance, Rush Ceremony, which you can morph into Honor the Dead, and Restoring Light, which you can morph Rune Focus, which you can morph into Restoring Focus. From the Dawn's Wrath line, Sunfire, which you can morph into Vampire's Bane, and then Backlash, which you're going to want to morph into Power of the Light. From the Adric Spear line, you have Puncturing Strikes, which you're going to want to morph into Biting Jabs, that will be your spammable most likely, and then Piercing Javelin, which you can morph into Binding Javelin. From the Fighters Guild, you're looking at Trap Beast, which you would want to morph into Rearming Trap. For medium armor, you're going to want to grab Evasion, which for PvE purposes anyway, you can morph into Elude. You could go into the other morph for PvP if you so want. For dual wield, you have Twin Slashes, and I'll leave it up to you to choose whether or not you want the one that gives healing or the one that gives more damage. Up to you based on what you feel like you need in your build. And then we have Blade Cloak, which you can morph into Deadly Cloak. From the bow, we have Snipe, which you can morph into Lethal Arrow, Volley, which you can morph into Endless Hail, and Poison Arrow, which you can morph into Poison Injection. Now, from the Assault skill line, yes, I would highly recommend if you're going to be playing a stamina DPS, hop into PvP to get some key skills. You're looking at Vigor, which you're going to morph into Resolving Vigor, and Caltrops, which you're going to morph into Razor Caltrops. Do note, though, guys, if you do choose to use a 2H instead of dual wielding, I'd recommend looking at Uppercut, Critical Charge, Reverse Slash, and Momentum as your ability choices that you're going to want to level up and eventually morph. So I went over the PvE side of things, but for PvP, use a 2H, look into those 4 skills, morph them how you like. In terms of ultimates, I'd recommend Dawnbreaker from the Fighters Guild, which I would morph into Flawless Dawnbreaker. From the Adric Spear line, you have Radial Sweep, which you would morph into Crescent Sweep. And then from Dawn's Wrath, we have Nova, which we can morph into Solar Prison. In terms of passives, we have the Adric Spear passives, all of them, all of Dawn's Wrath, all of Restoring Light, all of your racial passives, all of the medium armor passives, all of the dual wield passives, or if you plan on going the PvP route, all the 2H passives, the bow passives, all the vampire passives except for Savage Feeding and Blood Ritual. If you want to turn someone into a vampire, you can grab Blood Ritual, but it's not necessary. Medicinal Use from Alchemy, all of the Fighters Guild passives, all of the Undaunted passives, and then once all of these are required, get the passives from your other armor skill lines, your light and heavy armor lines, except for the ones that require you to wear 5 pieces, since you'll be wearing 5 pieces of medium. I'd recommend prioritizing the heavy armor passives over the light armor passives first. In terms of rotation, you're going to want to try to use any abilities that give you a buff first, as they're going to make any abilities used afterwards stronger, or they're going to help you stay alive longer. You optimally want to use any dots or AoE when you're attacking an opponent first, so you're going to want to use each dot you have on your enemy while weaving a light attack in between an animation canceling. So for example, just of some dots that you'd have, Endless Hail, Poison Injection, Rearming Trap, Rending Slashes, and Caltrops. You'd want to say use Endless Hail, Light Attack. Right as your light attack animation's about to go off, use Poison Injection or another skill, and that will cancel the animation of the light attack, but the light attack itself will still deal damage, and then the Poison Injection will go off instantaneously, so it's a way to deal more damage quicker. Another tip is that Power of the Light is great to use when you know you're going to deal gigantic damage, because it will duplicate that damage. You should have one spammable ability in your build to use when all your dots are up, or you don't need to buff yourself, you're just chilling. You should have something to spam while you're waiting for things to do, and in this case, it's most likely going to be Biting Jabs, and that also even buffs you up with Minor Savagery. I'd also recommend using any CC shields and heals as needed. You want to optimally make sure that for general play, you have a few of these at your disposal. Moving into tank, we have, for our races, Imperial, Argonian, Orc, or Nord are great choices. I'd say my number one is Argonian. Argonian at the current time of making this video is the best tank race, but any of the other ones do also make a good tank race as well if you're not a fan of being a lizard, but Argonians are currently number one. But like I said, any of the other 3 races still make solid choices. In terms of gear, you're looking at 1 piece of light, 1 piece of medium, 5 heavy, and you want to be using 2 one-handed and shield skill lines. So you want to use one-handed shield on both of your bars. Or another option that I could recommend possibly is using a restoration staff on your back bar. But I still would recommend, personally, if it were me, I would play double one-handed shield. But one-handed shield resto for general PvE is still a viable thing. In terms of attributes, I would say just shove all your points into health. Just the best way to go for a general guide like this. I would say going all into health is the best way. You can get into more advanced attribute point distributions when you hit endgame, but for the leveling process, I would say dump all of your stuff into health. In terms of vampire versus werewolf versus mortal, I was all the other ones, vampire is worth it. The negatives that you receive for being a vampire do not even come close to outweighing the massive recovery bonus you gain for being a vampire. So I would absolutely recommend being a vampire. In terms of Mundus, you are looking at the Lord Mundus, the one that increases your health pool. Atronach is another good one, the one that gives you Magicka recovery. Even a case could possibly be made for Ritual, the one that increases your healing done and received. But I personally, for general PvE, would just recommend grabbing the Lord. In terms of potions and food, obviously you're going to want to use health potions, keep you alive, but you could also, as a tank, I could also make a case for running either Magicka or stamina potions as well. I would say, keep all 3 potions as you level up, and then just use them as you need them. If you need to, get some more health, chug a health pot. If you're running out of Magicka, chug a Magicka pot. If you're running out of stamina, chug a stamina pot. It's really up to you which pot that you feel like you need to use the most, and I would mainly slot that one while you're playing. In terms of food, again, I don't think food's mandatory for a new player leveling, but if you can manage to find some or find some for cheap on a guild trader, or you want to craft some yourself, I would try to get stuff that gives you a flat stat increase. Health, magic, and stamina. Just try to find stuff that just increases your stats. That is what I would recommend as a tank. In terms of abilities, you want to do your best, as I've said for the other ones, to have one skill from each class tree on both your front and back bar. When you gain experience, whether it be from killing monsters or quests, the abilities on your active bar are the ones that are going to gain experience, as well as their respective skill lines, as when that applies to weapon and ability, like your class ability trees, There are certain trees like Vampirism that only level up from you gaining experience. You could use the skills all you want, but you won't gain any additional experience. Mage's Guild requires you to get lore books, so make sure that you understand how your skill lines are going to gain experience. But for the purposes of what I'm talking about, your class trees, you need to be using your class abilities, so make sure you have them on your bars. Another trick is that while you are leveling up, you can switch to a bar that, let's say, you want to gain some experience on when handing in a quest or completing a dungeon, and that'll give that skill, all the skills on that bar and the current weapon equipped, a huge surge of experience. You're going to notice that I do frequently recommend the first skill of a skill tree as a choice in my ability selection, just to obviously help you get started with getting that skill line leveled. If you do want to level another weapon or a skill tree without using that weapon or skill, just simply place that skill from that tree on your ability bar, and as you gain experience, it will gain experience, and that according skill tree will also gain experience. You don't actually have to use it. Now, in terms of recommended abilities for tanks, I'd recommend for the Restoring Light tree, looking into Rush Ceremony and morphing it into Breath of Life. I'd also recommend looking at Rune Focus, morphing it into Channeled Focus, and Restoring Aura, morphing it into Repentance. For Dawn's Wrath, we have Backlash, which you can morph into Purifying Light, or Sunfire, which you can morph into either Reflective Light if you want to get some more AoE, or Vampire's Bane if you want to focus more on a single target. For Adric's Spear, we have Puncturing Strikes, which you can morph into Puncturing Sweep, Sun Shield, which you can morph into Blazing Shield, Focus Charge, which you can morph into Toppling Charge. From the Mage's Guild skill line, we have Entropy, which you can morph into Structured Entropy, Fire Rune, which you can morph into Volcanic Rune. Fighters Guild, we have Circle of Protection, which you can morph into Ring of Preservation. And then from the Undaunted, we have Inner Fire, which could be morphed into Inner Rage. Bone Shield, which could be morphed into Bone Surge. And then from the One-Handed and Shield skill line, I'd recommend running Puncture, which can be morphed into Pierce Armor. And then obviously, if you decide to go with the Restoration Staff, there's a lot of good choices there that you could go for. I'm mainly covering the more one-handed shield play style, but if you're going to be going the resto tree route, you can't go wrong with any of those abilities. They're all pretty solid. In terms of ultimates, we're looking at the Adric Spear skill line, Radial Sweep, which can go into Empowering Sweep, and then from One-Handed Shield, we have Shield Wall into Spell Wall. And from Assault, we have Warhorn into Sturdy Warhorn. So those are the 3 ultimates I would recommend choosing from. In terms of your passives, we're looking at all of your Adric's Spear, Dawn's Wrath, and Restoring Light passives, all of your Racial passives, all of your Heavy Armor passives, all of your One-Handed Shield passives. Again, if you choose to run the Rasto Staff, if you choose to run the Resto Staff, you could get your Resto Staff passes again as a Templar, being that you have heals baked into your class. I don't think it's necessary, but just something to mention. All of the vampire passes except for Savage Feeding and Blood Ritual. You can grab Blood Ritual if you want to turn other people into vampires, but I don't think you need it. Alchemy, grab Medicinal Use. Fighter's Guild, if you choose to use a Fighter's Guild ability, grab them all. Otherwise, just make sure you're getting Banish the Wicked. Get your Mage's Guild passives if you choose to use a Mage's Guild ability. Get your Undaunted passives no matter what. And then once all of these are acquired and the majority of your main passives are acquired, get the passives from the other armor skill lines, medium and light, except for the ones that require you to wear 5 pieces of each gear type. Now, rotation, tanks do not have a set rotation like DPS, so just use things in your kit as you need them. I just would recommend 100% running Pierce Armor. You have to run Pierce Armor, being that is going to be your main taunt, so make sure that you are running that somewhere, and that is also going to be your, probably, I think, your main spammable ability, so just keep that in mind. You definitely want to have that. Now, moving on to Healer, the last section of this guide, guys. Moving into the races, we have Breton or Argonian. Either choice is really solid. I believe Argonian is the best. But Breton is still a case could be made for it. It's still a decent contender. In terms of gear, we have 5 light, 1 medium, 1 heavy, and then we want to use a lightning destruction staff and a restoration staff. That is 100% going to be the weapons you want to run, non-negotiable, no changes. The reason I say 5 light, 1 medium, 1 heavy is because healers get the most benefit from light armor, all of the Magicka passives that they get, but I would still recommend wearing a piece of medium and a piece of heavy to level up those skill lines while you are playing. In terms of attributes, dump all your attributes into Magicka. All of your heals get stronger and heal for more as you gain more Magicka, so you want to be putting all your points into Magicka. In terms of Vampire, Werewolf, Mortal, I would absolutely recommend being a Vampire. None of the drawbacks from being a Vampire outweigh the recovery that you gain from being a vampire. So Vampire is just worth it for everyone, and I definitely think as a healer you should pick it up. In terms of your Mundus Stone, I would highly recommend the Atronach Stone, which increases your Magicka recovery. I have seen people make a case for the Ritual, which is the one that increases healing done and received, or even Thief, which increases your crit chance, but I think Atronach is just the best way to go. Healers really love their Magicka recovery, so I would recommend just getting the Atronach. In terms of potions and food, obviously, you want to prioritize Magicka potions to make sure that your Magicka is maintained. And then in terms of food, it's not mandatory, but if you can find some, buy some cheap off a guild trader, whatever. Try to mainly prioritize the ones that increase your health, your Magicka, and or your Magicka recovery. You can go for tri-stat ones, the ones that increase your health, Magicka, and stamina, but I would recommend looking for ones that increase your health and or Magicka recovery. Remember, any food is better than no food. In terms of abilities, we want to do our best to have one ability from each class skill tree on both the front and back bar, because as I've said in all the other sections, when you gain experience, whether it be from killing monsters or quests, the abilities on your active bar are the ones that gain experience as well as their respective skill lines. Another cool trick is if you have abilities on your skill bar that you do want to level up, you can switch to that bar while handing in a quest or completing a dungeon to give them and their skill lines a surge of experience, if that is how their skill lines gain experience. For example, the Mage's Guild, that skill line gains experience by collecting lore books. The abilities will level up by getting experience, but the skill line itself levels up from lore books. Vampirism, same type of deal, except for instead of lore books, it's just your character gaining experience, but the abilities do still gain experience on their own. So I'd recommend for your non-class and weapon trees, hover your mouse over them to make sure that you understand how those lines gain their experience. So just keep that in mind. Also, if you do want to place another weapon or ability from a skill tree without using that weapon or skill, simply placing a skill from that tree on your ability bar will help it gain experience whenever you gain experience, as well as the skilled line. You don't actually have to use it. Now, in terms of our ability selection, from Restoring Light, we have a Rush Ceremony, which you want to morph into Breath of Life, Cleansing Ritual to morph into Extended Ritual, and Rune Focus to morph into Channeled Focus. From Dawn's Wrath, we want to grab Sunfire, which morphs into Vampire's Bane. From Adric's Spear, we have Puncturing Strikes, which morphs into Puncturing Sweep, and Spear Shards, which morphs into Luminous Shards. From the Mage's Guild, we have Mage Light, which morphs into Inner Light, Destruction Staff, we have Wall of Elements, which you want to morph into Elemental Blockade, and Weakness to Elements, which morphs into Elemental Drain. From the Restoration Staff, we have Grand Healing, which you're going to want to morph into Healing Springs, Regeneration, which is going to be morphed into Mutagen, and Blessing of Protection, which you want to morph into Combat Prayer. In terms of Light Armor, we have Annulment that you're going to want to morph into Harness Magicka, and from the Undaunted line, we have Necrotic Orb, which you're going to want to morph into Energy Orb. Now, you guys might be wondering, why did I say Lightning Staff only? I'm actually going to go into that before I continue while I'm on this ability section. It is because later on, it's because using a Lightning Staff causes other enemies to be off-balanced, and that is a very, very good thing for your group. If you're playing with anyone in your group that has champion points, and they have a certain champion point tree leveled up a certain amount, they get a bonus from dealing damage to off-balance targets. So that is definitely why you want to run the Lightning Staff as opposed to, say, a Fire or Ice Staff. So I'd recommend throughout your leveling process trying to maintain a Lightning Staff if you can. That is just something to keep in mind. Now, for the ultimates, we have from the Assault tree, we have Warhorn, which you're going to want to morph into Aggressive Warhorn. Dawn's Wrath, we have Nova, which you're going to want to morph into Solar Prison. Or from Restoring Light, we even have Rite of Passage, which you can morph into Remembrance if, let's say, you don't have Aggressive Warhorn. Now, in terms of our passives, we have all of the ones from Adric Spear, Dawn's Wrath, Restoring Light, our Racial, Light Armor, Destruction Staff, and Restoration Staff. You want all of them. You want all them passives. And then from Vampire, you want all of them except for Savage Feeding and Blood Ritual. Unless you want to turn someone into a vampire, then by all means grab Blood Ritual. From Alchemy, we are looking at Medicinal Use. From the Mages Guild, you want all of their passives. From the Fighters Guild, you want Banish the Wicked. You want all of the Undaunted passives. And once all these are acquired, get the passives from the other armor or skill lines, except for the ones that require you to wear 5 pieces of gear from that gear type. So I probably recommend, though, getting the heavy armor ones before the medium armor ones, as you'll gain more benefit from the heavy armor ones before the medium ones. And then for rotation, healers do not have a set rotation like DPS do, so use things in your kit as you need them. Whew! We made it, friends. That is the end of the first leveling framework, the Templar, knocked out of the way. I hope that this is something that you guys were looking for. In my opinion, this is how leveling builds should have been made this whole time. I think it is probably the best way to show a new player this is how you want to level. Instead of giving them something static, give them a framework, give them choice, give people something to choose from so that they can not only level up the necessary stuff, but make choice and feel like they're forging and creating their own character throughout their leveling process. It's great and all to follow a static build or whatever, but you're not learning anything. You're not experimenting or forging your own path while leveling. Don't focus so much on the end game and what you should be using for builds and stuff. I'm telling you, listen to this framework, focus the stuff that I've outlined here, and come end game, you will be able to go into whatever build that you guys want to, and your character will be set up for success. So if you guys appreciated all the work that went into this, I would really appreciate it if you guys hit that like button. Also, to see the rest of the leveling build series, to see the dungeon guide series, and to see some awesome streams, I'd appreciate it if you guys subscribed, as well as hit the little bell next to the subscribe button in order to be notified when I do things here on YouTube. If you would prefer to watch me stream on Twitch instead of YouTube, you could also go shoot over to Twitch and give me a follow. But thanks, guys. This was a really fun video to make. I hope you guys really like it. And if this is the format that we all like, moving forward, this is how I'm going to do all of the other ones. So thank you guys so much for watching. Appreciate you stopping by. As always, I'm Dottz Gaming, and I will see you all next time.